Picking up where we left off in last night's Angle, we're looking into the role former Obama officials played in setting an intel trap against the Trump team. With the dam of evidence now bursting, former Obama officials are trying to muddy the waters by sowing confusion. Here's a case in point.
Is there anything in the dossier that has been disproven?
No, some of it hasn't been proven, and some of it hasn't been. No, I guess the short answer to the question. The salacious stuff, absolutely no corroboration of that to my knowledge.
Wait, nothing's been disproved? How would he know? He hasn't been the director of the National Intelligence for a year and a half. And that's actually the opposite of the truth. None of the wild claims in the dossier have been proven, not publicly. You can bet if any of it were true, it would have been leaked by now. They're always leaking the stuff that they think is bad for Trump. Clapper's statement isn't even accurate. The dossier incorrectly claimed Michael Cohen went to Prague to meet with the Russians. Of course, he's never been to Prague, no public evidence of that, looked at his passport, etc. But never mind the facts. What's really telling about Clapper's remark is that he gives away the deep state strategy. What is it? Which is basically create so much doubt and confusion that Americans give up trying to make sense of any of it. To that end, Clapper and fellow Obama alums are pushing the line that if the dossier can't be disproved, it must be true. Like, when did you stop beating your wife? Well, let's discuss how well that strategy will work in light of all the recent developments with former CIA analyst and counterterror operations officer John Kiriakou, Republican Congressman Steve Russell of the House Oversight Committee, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Robert Driscoll. Congressman, this is wild. I mean, the never-ending media appearances by Jim Clapper. We were joking earlier, like, he must be promoting a book, and indeed he is promoting a book. But what's your take on what he said right there?
I think it just shows that this is really a house of cards where they're trying to make something they have no evidence of. And when they talk about people being guilty, it has nothing to do with collusion. I think the American people, they see right through this. It is a continual straw man argument, and they're going to continue to push it every way they can.
That meeting at the White House today with what are they calling it? It's always the Gang of Eight. Why don't we call it the Mob of Eight? The Gang of Eight. It's not clear what documents were actually presented to Devin Nunes or to Trey Gowdy. Were they able to actually look at the documents or not look at the documents?
The details of the meeting will not be released because it was
Mitch McConnell was tight-lipped about this.
Well, and all of those that were present, as they should be. But I think the bigger concern is that will Devin Nunes and Trey Gowdy and others be able to actually get the information, to look at the information without redaction? You know, we see these problems where they will redact things, withholding it from Congress. Well, since 1814 in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, we have that responsibility. Nothing should be redacted from Congress. They need to get to the facts.
But, Robert, this is what Adam Schiff said about the meeting. Let's watch.
Nothing we heard today has changed our view that there is no evidence to support any allegation that the FBI or any intelligence agency placed a spy in the Trump campaign or otherwise failed to follow appropriate procedures and protocols.
But apparently they actually didn't have the access to the documents that they wanted. At least it's not clear that they did. And so how is he coming out? It's like, well, nothing we saw. Well, apparently they didn't see all the documents. Well, again.
And what I took from what he said was it's a very carefully worded statement. He said no evidence that they placed a spy in the campaign. Now, that could still mean you had a confidential informant contact people in the campaign and record their conversations.
They didn't actually have an office at Trump Tower.
But that means they didn't have an embed in the campaign. Okay, I get that, but I don't think that's necessarily what's of most concern to Congress. So I think what's interesting to me is that Trump could declassify all this stuff himself with the stroke of a pen. And he's actually showing a little bit of deference to DOJ he's almost playing a mediating role between two branches of government rather than acting as the head of the executive branch, saying, look, you know, Congress has got a point. There needs to be more transparency here. I'm not going to force you to disclose everything because there may be some interests that are so strong it's justified.
Honest reasons for redaction.
But things like, I mean, I couldn't get over the $70,000 conference room table that Andrew McCabe bought was one of the redactions.
Well, then they get on Ben Carson's wife for the table. She got... Yeah, well, how much was that? That was 11,000. You got a 70. Where do they get their tables?
Well, I mean, trust is really broken
God, they got to go to like the
Yeah.
storehouse or whatever. Come on, John. Let's talk to you. Like, we've been talking a lot about the overreach of the surveillance state. I did a big piece on this last night. Since 9/11, I guess all these good intentions, we're going to keep the nation safe. Of course, we all want to keep the nation safe.
All of us.
But we have created a surveillance superstate in this country. And I think there are a lot of good people in all these agencies, and they put their lives on the line for us. But people at the top also think they're beyond reproach, and they're so confident that they're right. They want to do what they want to do with impunity.
And that's the deep state. I'm glad that you keep calling it the deep state because it exists. You don't have to call it the deep state. You can call it the federal bureaucracy. But it's there, it's unelected, and it's in power forever. People have to remember that those patriots at the CIA, the FBI, NSA, and elsewhere, many of them came of age and entered into the senior intelligence service during the Obama administration. And for many of them, that's where their loyalties lie. So, yeah, there really is a deep state. The congressman made a very important point, too, and that's about congressional oversight. The CIA, just as a part of its very nature, pushes back on congressional oversight, and they'll provide to Congress as little as they can get away with. That's where Congress has to fight for its rightful role in oversight.
And you were put in jail for 30 months. You leaked the information about the waterboarding,
Yes.
correct? It's a long story, and most of the charges were dropped. One remained. But you felt what happened when you decided to say, this, it didn't seem right to you.
And this is a warning.
Like, I don't lose sleep about waterboarding. I know a lot of people do.
A lot of people don't.
Like
And reasonable
KSM,
people
I don't really
can-
care about
can
that.
disagree,
But,
sure.
But you feel that the way things have developed in this country, with the explosion of the intel agencies, that it's very hard for Congressman Russell and Devin Nunes, Trey Gowdy, and frankly for Democrats, if they were honest, to actually say, hey, what's going on here? Like, you got these sites, these rendition sites in Pakistan and everything. What's happening here? And they don't want to say.
absolutely
That is
right.
a natural tension, and it always has been there, but it's worse. The bigger the intel state is, the super state, the harder it is, correct?
Correct. And remember that it got far worse during the Obama administration. John Brennan at the White House had what former colleagues of mine have described as a Nixonian obsession with leaks, where he was the driving force between the 8 Espionage Act cases that the Obama Justice Department brought against people in the intelligence community. That's nearly 3 times the number of Espionage Act cases as all previous presidents combined. And it wasn't really about those individuals. It was about sending a message to the rest of the intelligence community to keep your mouths shut.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
Exactly.
That's a little mafia-esque. Congressman and Robert, I want you both to respond. You can see where this is going. The left is trying to find these side issues to grasp onto. I don't think informants in a campaign or trying to make contact with a campaign is a side issue. I do think it's a side issue when they say, oh, the president's lawyer and the chief of staff were at a meeting for a short period of time. They were freaking out about this today. Let's watch.
I was stunned when I heard that Emmett Flood attended, even if he wasn't there for the classified part of it, that he would even show his presence.
The presence of Emmett Flood, even if it was just to make introductory remarks, clearly now creates a conflict.
What we saw in that meeting today was improper, and it was unprecedented, and it does risk undermining parts of the Mueller probe.
I don't know if these people know anything about the law. Emmett Flood was there to say, we're here, we want to help, we want transparency, we're cooperating with, and want to take a positive role in this, and they stayed apparently just for a short period of time. They were gone. Congressman.
It's the typical Pravda-like playbook. Admit nothing, deny everything, make counter-accusations. Put up some shiny object, distract on the facts.
Did you say Pravda-like playbook?
Yes,
oh,
I did.
I love it. Isn't that fun? Robert.
Again, it's kind of commonplace. I mean, the president, again, is playing a mediating role in this, and I think all that happened was Flood was there at the beginning, said the president really wants you guys to release as much as you can.
Transparency.
And then they walked out prior to the classified portion of the briefing, is my understanding.
It's like they're making it like Emmett. They're making it like Emmett like directed the meeting, and he was like, "Okay, calling on you and you and you." That's like how it went down.
In any government thing,
it's
I mean, you have to pick a branch, right? And the people that from DOJ work for the president, and so it's not inappropriate for the president and the White House counsel to say prior to the meeting, "You work for us. Here's where the boss wants to go with this. He wants maximum transparency while still protecting what you think you need."
Robert, I got to ask you this: what is the likelihood that only one informant, this hapless helper, apparently this professor, is the only person who was tasked with some type of outreach to the Trump campaign? Doesn't it seem odd that it would be just one guy? I mean, maybe it was, but that's kind of that's just lame. If they're really wanting to get answers, just one guy.
The Australian contact was the one that always was a question to me, because I mean, I've been in a lot of bars with a lot of people who've said a lot of stupid stuff, and the notion that I would run to the FBI or run to an intelligence agency based on a late-night conversation with somebody in a bar that I allegedly
with Papadopoulos. Is that the Papadopoulos meeting?
I mean, in London. I mean, it seems kind of strange to me. I mean, maybe that is totally innocent, and he just has a hair trigger for when to run to an intelligence agency. But I don't think that's common behavior, and that might be worthy of taking a look at.
Well, I just think they have to bring more people to testify in Capitol Hill. We're almost out of time, but I'd bring more people back. Susan Rice has got to come back. I'd bring all these people back. I'd bring Loretta Lynch. I'd bring that Oleg Deripaska, that Russian billionaire that they were making contact with, trying to get him to agree to this collusion narrative. He left him out of his apartment in New York. I'd get all these people back. We're not getting the answers we deserve. And bring the people back to testify. They don't want to testify. That tells us a lot. Samantha Power, bring her in. She never testified at all, I don't believe. Right, Congressman? I don't believe she was ever up there.
With me to discuss this is the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, and also the author of Facts and Fears, Hard Truths from a Life in Intelligence. I want to ask about North Korea, but let's just first talk about what you just heard from the former New York City mayor, the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. He called you and Mr. Brennan a clown, and he also said that you're just political appointees, and that's where the heart of these investigations come from.
Well, in the space of a week, I've progressed from being the dumbest foreign intelligence officer on the planet, according to President Trump, and now a clown. So, it's a career progression, I guess, at its best. It just more in the narrative here.
Let's talk about the specifics, though. The idea of the president's legal team wanting to get a briefing from the FBI about this confidential source. Good idea?
Well, no. I mean, I don't think this is a good idea at all, any more than it was a good idea to have the president's attorney show up unannounced, I guess, for the Gang of Eight briefing. I was recalling when I heard about that, my last Gang of Eight briefing, which was on the 6th of January 2017, when we briefed the Gang of Eight before we flew up to New York to brief then President-elect
And the Gang of Eight, the leadership in Congress.
Leadership in Congress, to include, of course, importantly, the chair and ranking members of each of the intelligence oversight committees. I was trying to imagine what would have been like had somebody just walked in at that session, which had extremely sensitive information in it. And that's just not done. It really contravenes a long-standing practice and norm that makes our government work.
I want to ask you one of the things that Rudy Giuliani brought up, and that the president has been tweeting about this weekend as well, which is if there was enough concern about people penetrating the Trump campaign, why not contact him? Why not contact the campaign instead of sending an informant or a confidential source? And what's the answer to that?
Well, I think the first thing is determine just what was going on. If there wasn't a concern about the Russians, and that could be allayed, then perhaps no reason to do that. The FBI has rules and protocols on when they decide to do things like that, and I don't think at that point that it had reached the point where it would be appropriate to engage, with the head of the campaign or the nominee.
But you didn't, as the director of national intelligence, did you know about the operation or not?
No, absolutely not. I did not know about it, nor would it be appropriate for any DNI to know about the specifics of informants, their identities, or what they're doing on the part of the FBI. I mean, that's lots of reasons for that, not the least of which is the confidentiality and the protection of the informants.
Let's talk about North Korea. You have spent a lot of time in the Korean Peninsula in your career. Most recently, in 2014, you went as DNI to Pyongyang to help free 2 Americans. What is your interpretation of this back and forth that's been going on over the summit?
Well, first of all, I support the letter that President Trump sent to Kim Jong-un. I think it was a good thing to do. Having done that, though, I think I've been long an advocate of, and this is typical North Korean, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's what they always do. And in some ways, Kim Jong-un may have met his match here with our very unconventional president. What I've been long an advocate for is let's first establish the conduit, the apparatus for communicating, which I think would be a real plus for the summit. And by that I mean establishing interest sections in both Washington and Pyongyang. What this means is a diplomatic presence below the level of a full embassy, much as we did in Havana, Cuba for decades. This would facilitate, would be reciprocal, would facilitate dialogue, would gain a lot more insight and understanding about what's going on in North Korea, would promote information flow into North Korea, and importantly, would give the North Koreans a measure of security. And if they could agree to tone down the rhetoric and use that conduit instead, that would be an improvement. Just a note on denuclearization. Denuclearization could also be a two-way street, and that is apply to the United States as well, where the North Koreans could expect us to restrict our nuclear umbrella, meaning no more B-1s, B-2s, or B-52s deploying on the peninsula or within operational proximity. So just
unfortunately, we're out of time. Just real quick, can you just tell me, do you think it is better for the president to have this summit, regardless of whether there's no agreement, just to establish the dialogue?
I do. I think there's value, having gone this far, there's value in meeting and greeting, gripping and grinning, and just establishing a rapport. I think, yes, I think it would be important to have the summit.